You have survived the first half of 2020, so let's celebrate with another episode of the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Welcome back to the Paperback Warrior Podcast. My name is Eric, and I'll introduce my broadcast partner Tom in just a minute. Paperback Warrior is the internet's finest source of news and reviews for vintage fiction in the hard-boiled crime, spy, western, and men's adventure genres. We have a blog at paperbackwarrior.com that hosts our daily reviews. You can also join the conversation by following Paperback Warrior on Facebook, where we post photos and show notes in the comments of the posting for this episode. Let me introduce my colleague Tom, who's going to tell us what's happening this week.
All right, Eric, thank you. Today's feature is about a classic crime fiction author named Thomas B. Dewey, who was the author of 3 successful series titles in the mid-20th century that you should know about. He's really something special, so you don't want to skip that part. I'll be reviewing a book in his Mac series of private eye adventures. I should probably know, but I do not. What are you reviewing today, Eric?
I'll be reviewing a 1960 paperback called Roadblock by Hilary Wall.
Okay. Spoil it for me a little bit. Is Hillary a man or a woman?
Surprisingly, Hillary is a man.
Interesting. They keep doing that to me, don't they?
He's a woman, she's a man.
All right, fair enough. Well, gender's a social construct, so who am I to say? Okay, so before we get into the festivities, I think we need to acknowledge the bomb we exploded in the literary world by releasing episode 48 of the podcast titled The Casca Controversy.
Yeah, that was unexpected. A normal Paperback Warrior episode gets about 350 downloads, maybe a little more, which includes streaming on all the platforms. That's downloads, not actual live plays. But the Casca episode has reached over 740 downloads, which is pretty high.
It sounds like we are a bona fide internet hit. We've finally gone viral.
Indeed, and for those who haven't listened, you probably should listen to that one first, because Tom has a bit of an epilogue for the listeners. As the listener will recall, the investigation dealt with allegations of plagiarism in the Casca series by an author named Michael Goodwin, who wrote 2 installments after the series creator, Barry Sadler, died. Tom interviewed a ton of people, including Mr. Goodwin, and after comparing the text, it's clear that Mr. Goodwin copied entire giant sections of David Morrell's Rambo 3 and Andrew Finiday's The Trespassers in his own Casca books. Does that kind of sum it up a little bit?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, all right. So the comments on the Paperback Warrior Facebook postings relating to this Casca episode that we did have lots of commentary about what occurred, and the listener can visit all of that right there on the page. But the question on everyone's mind is, did you get any feedback from Michael Goodwin about the episode?
Yes, sort of.
Okay, all right.
I received a Facebook message from Mike Goodwin's account, but the writer claimed to be Mike's wife, but it was coming from his account. So sitting here today, I have no idea if it was Mike or the wife. So let's just assume it was Mike, because he's a crafty fellow. He said that he listened to the podcast and was shocked, Eric, to hear the similarities between his Casca book and David Morrell's Rambo 3. He then accused the dead editor of the series, a guy named Gale, of editing his completely original novel and inserting plagiarized material into it. I told Mike, or whoever was on the other end of this conversation, that I didn't believe him at all, because all of his other books were also plagiarized, including the ones after Gale's death. And this is news. His newest book was released on May 25, 2020, like 6 weeks before our episode aired. The novel is called Paraxis Rising, and it opens in Chapter 1 with a prison scene, which is lifted word for word with nothing changed from the 1985 paperback Tie Horse by William Deal, who wrote Sharky's Machine, which was later made into a movie with Burt Reynolds, I think. And again, this was published 20 days before the podcast aired, after Mike was first interviewed by me.
So, I mean, basically, he hasn't stopped this, and apparently, I mean, is anyone suing him? I mean, going after him in any legal context?
I again, not to my knowledge, but again, I'm not offering my legal services here. I sent the screenshots of his book and the William Deal book side by side to show him, or the wife, or whoever I was talking to, that the books were word for word the same. And he simply responded, "Similar, but still different, especially as it goes along. And there are only so many ways to write how long you've been in jail." At that point, it became clear that this had ceased to be a productive conversation, to put it nicely, and that we were kind of talking past each other. But here's some news that just hit me today from that James Nollett guy whose like life's mission is to embarrass Mike Goodwin. And he sent me, I've seen the work, so I'm happy to say this. We saw evidence that only the first 30 pages of Mike's book, Casca, Immortal Dragon, was actually plagiarized word from word from Rambo 3. And on the show, you and I went through that. The rest of the book was a bit of a mystery where he was getting that from. James Nollett has discovered and shown me that it is entirely taken, again, word for word, from a Super Bolin book called Lethal Tribute in the Mac Bolin series, allegedly by Don Pendleton. I can't remember the name of the ghostwriter there. Anyway, so I guess my point here is that I'm not the book police. I don't want to give this guy any more attention on the show. I want to close this issue. We have some cool investigations coming up. I got some interviews coming up with people that I've stumbled upon whose fathers and family members wrote these books. I don't want to make this a show about Casca or plagiarism or Mike Goodwin anymore. You have any final thoughts on this thing?
Understood. I say, here's the thing. I say just read at your own risk. If Goodwin is your cup of tea, drink it up. I'll reserve my reading for authors that produce original manuscripts. So with that out of the way, what else is going on, Tom?
All right, well, I guess we should probably acknowledge that this is our 50th episode. So, Eric, happy anniversary.
Hey, happy anniversary. Same to you. I wish we had something to celebrate with, but you have nothing but water and vinegar in the entire house.
Exactly. Well, it's I spend all my money on paperbacks. I don't want to do anything too self-serving, but I thought it might be fun for each of us to reveal our favorite episode or segment on the show thus far, particularly because we may have picked up some new listeners from the Casca episode who've decided to kind of tune in and stick with us.
Yeah, and all 50 episodes are available to stream on every podcast platform, as well as paperbackwarrior.com. I will warn new listeners to our show that, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so of the first episodes were recorded on less than stellar studio equipment. But as the show progressed and our fan base grew, our monetary donations increased. So thanks to the listeners and fans who are, we're indebted to eternally, we upgraded the equipment, and I think we really sound as good as ever. But in saying that, one of my favorite episodes
is when we were begging for money for new equipment.
Yeah, but it was an early one. You probably remember this. It was episode number 5, where we discussed the entire Mac Bolin universe. We did a deep dive on the Executioner books, all the revolving authors, and looked at everything from comics to rumored movies. We also expanded a little bit, and we covered the Able Team and Phoenix Force and Stony Man and all that good stuff. But that was my favorite episode. What about you?
I'm going to cheat and highlight 2 related segments that I think have a lot of utility for listeners. Episode 8 is where we gave our tricks on how to buy affordable vintage paperbacks to build your collection. I think people found that useful because if you're doing it wrong, you're going to spend a small fortune acquiring these old paperbacks we talk about, and there's a better way. So check that out on episode 8. Episode 9 was sort of the sequel to that, which explained what to do with all these books once you find them. The feature was called Building a Reader's Library, and we provided tips on how to organize a large library in a way that's not going to make your wife nuts, and you won't be living in a hoarder house full of paperbacks. So I think those are the 2 episodes I'm most proud of, and as far as features that might be actually useful to people as opposed to just turning them on to authors.
Time's a-ticking.
All right, ready for the feature?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, play the transition music. Our feature today is about an author named Thomas B. Dewey, who was born in Elkhart, Indiana in 1915, and he died in Tempe, Arizona in 1981. Since we've been talking about plagiarism a lot lately, I should probably acknowledge that my source material for this feature is the book Paperback Confidential by Brian Ritt, published by Stark House. It's actually my favorite reference book about these vintage paperbacks, and you should buy it from Amazon or the Stark House website. Anyway, back to Thomas Dewey. He wrote 36 novels and a handful of short stories between 1944 and 1969, most of which were concentrated between 3 successful series characters that we're going to go into detail about in a minute. He also wrote a small number of standalone novels using pseudonyms Tom Brandt and Cord Wayner. But first I want to talk about his life. Dewey graduated from Kansas State Teachers College in 1936, and he attended grad school at the University of Iowa. Go Hawkeyes. After grad school, he moved to Hollywood to find his fortune, and he found himself actually working for a correspondence school called Storycraft until 1942, when he moved to Washington, D.C., to be an editorial assistant for the U.S. State Department during World War II. It doesn't look from my research that he was ever in the military during World War II, and I never figured out why, but I'm sure it was a very interesting time to be working in the State Department. While working as a writer and editor for the State Department, he began writing novels as a side hustle. His first published novel was in 1944. It was called Hue and Cry, and it was also released as Room for Murder and The Murder of Marion Mason. The protagonist was someone named Singer Batts, and he went on to write 3 other novels starring the same character. We got Hue and Cry, which we talked about. We got As Good as Dead from 1946, Morning After from 1950, and Handle with Fear from 1951. Now, Singer Batts, as a character, was a hotel owner in Preston, Ohio, who was a big Shakespeare buff. In the book, Singer Batts has a hotel manager named Joe Spinder, who serves as his partner solving the mysteries in these novels. And I believe Spinder might actually be the narrator. I haven't read any of the Singer Batts books, but we have a listener named William Martell who has. He likens the series to the Nero Wolfe books by Rex Stout, only that Singer Batts operates out of a hotel in a farm town. My impression is that Singer Batts is the super intelligent bookworm, and that Joe Spinder is like the Archie Goodwin character out in the streets running down the leads. Spinder tells the stories as the narrator, just like Archie Goodwin did in the Nero Wolfe books. Now, our listener, Mr. Martell, says that the stories have a good sense of humor. He said that they are rich, small-town characters throughout novels. Like a sexy new teacher moves into town and all the dudes are fighting over her and then a murder occurs. It's filled with stuff like that. The original Singer Batts novels are going to be really hard to find, but Wildside Press has come to the rescue. They've packaged all 4 novels into one volume sold as the Singer Batts Mega Pack for 99 cents as an ebook on your Kindle. I bought the Mega Pack, but I haven't read it yet. It's certainly a great value for $1. So 1945 rolls around, and Dewey leaves the State Department to go back to Los Angeles to work in advertising. It's there that he marries his first wife, Maxine Morley Sorensen, in 1951. It was during his Los Angeles advertising years that he launched his most popular series, starring a Chicago private eye named Mac. Now, the reader never gets to know his full name in the entire series. The first Mac book was Draw the Curtain Close in 1947. After it was published, it took him 6 years to write and publish the second Mac novel, titled Every Bet's a Sure Thing, in 1953. I read and reviewed that one, and I'll discuss it later in the episode. The Mac series continues for 17 novels, with the last one titled The Tourist Trap, published in 1970. There was also one Mac short story called The Big Job, published in the Saint Mystery Magazine in 1965. Mac is a great character, and he's the way to go if you want to explore Dewey's writing, which you should do. Mac is often described as the compassionate private eye, and that's true, but it also understates the fact that Mac can and does kick some serious ass when called upon to do so. In the book I read, Mac goes above and beyond his investigative engagement because he wants to ensure that some kids who are in the mix are safe and cared for. So that's stuff like that. That's how he gets the rap for being a compassionate private eye. I was hesitant to read them at first because I thought compassionate meant sort of soft-boiled, but I found that not to be the case at all. His compassion as a character, I find, really humanizes him in the body of his first-person narration. These are top-notch private eye stories, not some cozy mystery. I'll be reviewing more Mac books at Paperback Warrior, and he may turn out to be one of my favorite private eye characters of all time. Now, Brian Ritt in Paperback Confidential says that the highlights of the series are A Sad Song Singing from 1963, where Mac is hired by a teenage singer to find her guitar-playing boyfriend. The Mean Streets from 1955, where Mac goes undercover as a high school teacher to search for the leader of a violent teenage gang who's terrorizing the community. And Deadline from 1966, where Mac has 4 days to save an innocent man from the electric chair and find the real killer. I found that there's no particular reason to read the series in any order, so you might as well start with the best of them first unless you want to read them all in order because of your own mental illness. I see these paperbacks around in the wild quite a bit, but once again, Wildside Press comes to the rescue. They've printed most, if not all of them, for like $5 for each ebook. In 1952, Dewey quits his job in advertising to write full-time, a job he continued until 1971. In 1957, he launches his third series character, a San Fernando Valley private eye named Pete Schofield. The first book in that series is And Where She Stops from 1957. And the series continued for 9 installments through 1965's Nude in Nevada. The gist of the series is that Pete Schofield solves crimes with his adorable redheaded wife, Jean. I guess there's lots of snappy dialogue between them. The whole thing seems a little cutesy and screwball for my taste. According to Brian Ritt, again, the best titles in that series are The Golden Hooligan from 1961, a story about a dead bullfighter. Go, Honey Lou from 62, where Pete searches for a kidnapped 19-year-old sex pot. Only on Tuesdays from 1964, which includes the death of a pinup model, a mysterious dog found in Pete's bedroom closet, and a sailboat race to Catalina Island. I think the Pete Schofield series may also be available on Kindle from Wildside Press. Now, this is unusual, Eric, because the usual trajectory for an author from this era is to write a bunch of standalone novels, kind of hone your chops, and then launch what you hope would be a successful series. Dewey, however, did it backwards. He launched 3 successful series titles right out of the gate, and keeping Mac and Pete Schofield alive at the same time. Now, he did write a bunch of standalone novels, or a handful of them, I'd say, a couple under his own name, but he also deployed pseudonyms in the 1950s, which was pretty common. It was a way to either get some extra work on the side without your publisher knowing, or ensuring that you're not flooding the market and hurting your own brand. As far as standalones by Dewey goes, I want to hand you one here, visual aids for our audio podcast. Here's one. Okay, this one here is called Mountain Girl. It's a Fawcett Gold Medal from 1952, written under the pseudonym of Cord Wayner. The front tagline says, Crystal was a hellcat, and every man was her prey. It looks like a fun crime novel, kind of leveraging the hook of a rural, untamed woman, and it was very common back then. The other standalone I want to hand you right here is a 1961 novel written under Dewey's own name called Hunter at Large. It must have been commercially successful because it went through at least 3 printings. It's about a cop who witnesses the brutal murder of his own wife and quits the force to engage in his own private manhunt for the killer. I haven't read it yet, but it looks great. I got a paperback copy there. He also wrote 2 standalone novels under the pseudonym of Tom Brandt. I read one, and you read one, Eric. Both reviews are on paperbackwarrior.com. Why don't you briefly tell us about the one you reviewed?
The one I read was called Kiss Me Hard from 1953. And like Tom said, it was written under the Tom Brandt pseudonym, but it's been reprinted by Wildside Press as an ebook under Dewey's own name. The book is about an alcoholic piano player who hops on a freight train while running from a jealous husband. While he's on the run, he meets a beautiful woman with a mysterious past who serves as the core of the mystery. And Tom, it reminded me a lot of David Goodis, who himself loved writing about alcoholics. Specifically, his book Shoot the Piano Player, which was also known as Down There. Again, Dewey's paperback was called Kiss Me Hard, and you can find it under his own name, the original published as Tom Brandt.
Cool. Let me hand you my Tom Brandt book here. My dive into the pseudonym was 1954's Run, Brother, Run, also available from Wildside under Dewey's own name. It was about a Chicago private eye who goes undercover for an insurance company client to infiltrate a heist crew. It was fantastic. When I hear a Thomas Dewey Chicago private eye novel, I can't help but wonder if Run, Brother, Run started off as a Mac novel and then Dewey abandoned it to make it a standalone. We'll never know. But the book's terrific, and you should definitely seek it out again. Again, it's Run, Brother, Run, released under Tom Brandt's name, or the ebook is still available under Dewey's own name.
Yeah, and you've got a review out in the paperbackwarrior.com archives.
Yeah, so you could find it by clicking on Dewey's name in the archives on the right side of the page. So Dewey's last novel gets released in 1969, and then it appears he retired from writing fiction at age 54. And in 1971, he becomes a professor of English at Arizona State University, where he taught writing. And what a breath of fresh air it must have been for these college kids to have a writing professor who was actually the super successful published author. In 1972, he married his second wife, Doris Smith, and the author died 9 years later in 1981 at age 66. Now, Hollywood never really adapted any of his books for the big screen, but 2 of his novels were made into TV episodes. I guess there was a show, an anthology show called Bob Hope Presents the Chrysler Theater. It was on NBC, and they did a 60-minute episode called Runaway in 1964, which is based on a Mac novel called A Sad Song Singing. But the character on the TV show is not called Mac. Now, sometimes you've probably seen these. You ever seen paperbacks for the show Cannon?
I haven't.
Yeah, William Conrad played, it was 1971 to 1976, sort of a portly character named Cannon. I think he has a Private Eye show. Then in 1971, they did a Cannon episode called Death's a Double Cross. Now, it was based on the novel Every Bet's a Sure Thing, which I'll review later in the show. It's the second Mac book. But again, they changed Mac into Cannon because it's the Cannon show, right? Anyway, so that's about all I got about Thomas Dewey for now. I'll come back and do a review at the end of the show. But you have a different review for us. Why don't you launch right into that?
Yeah, definitely. So I have a review for Hilary Wall's 1960 paperback, Roadblock. And again, the first thing you need to know about the author is that Hilary Wall is, in fact, a male. He wrote over 45 novels of mystery and suspense from 1947 through 1988. He had a number of series, including an 11-book series starring a Connecticut police chief named Fred Fellows. The series debut, Sleep Along My Love, was published in 1959, and it was adapted for screen under the title Jigsaw in 1962. Now, I don't own it, and I can't locate a copy of it, so I'd have to be a savage like Tom and start with book number 2, which is Roadblock, which is what I did.
All right, very good.
The first thing I noticed when reading this old paperback is that Wall, he emphasizes procedure in his writing. His narratives typically present the police investigation into two, let's say, point-by-point halves. One as a heist or murder and planning, and the second half as the actual police procedural investigation. The book's opening 80 pages depicts a criminal trio attempting to push over a nearby manufacturing plant to steal the week's payroll. And it's a cool 93,000, and it's delivered by an armored truck to this precise location. The heist is blueprinted, it's planned, it's executed, which is really, the whole purpose of the book's second half, which is solely devoted to the series protagonist Fred Fellows and his police staff just trying to figure out how they did it and what occurred. The book's name, Roadblock, is fitting, considering that Fellows and the state troopers bottleneck the criminal cohorts on the expansive Merritt Parkway. So while the roadblock is set, Fellows interviews plant employees and guards and just basically tries to determine how the heist happened. While certainly enjoyable, Roadblock is more like an event timeline like Dragnet than an actual story. Unless Sleep Long My Love served as an origin story, I felt that this second installment should have provided some backstory on Fred Fellows, even as brief as that might be. His police procedures, including the geographical deductions, were entertaining, but I never deduced that Fellows was necessarily the star of the show. In terms of police procedural novels, Wall certainly isn't Ed McBain. Roadblock, I don't know, it was an easy, quality read that's far better than another popular police roadblock story, which was called Pursuit by Richard Unicus?
Yeah, I got that. It was based on a movie or made into a movie or something.
Yeah. It became a film called Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry.
Yes.
And I read that book and reviewed it on paperbackwarrior.com along with Roadblock. I'm going to say Roadblock is actually better than that. But anyway, check out Roadblock by Hilary Wall, or let us know if you have read any of this series, because I'm just kind of interested to see how the series is and what some of the highlights are.
Knowing what you know now, would you read another Hilary Wall book?
I would, yeah, I definitely would.
Okay, well, that's good then. My review is for a Mac novel by Thomas Dewey called Every Bet's a Sure Thing from 1953. It's the second book in the Mac series, but the first I've read. Eric, can you guess why I started with book number 2?
I don't know why you do the things that you do, but from my own experience, I can't do it unless I'm absolutely forced to. I have to have some type of origin in some way, even if it's just simply the number 1 printed on the spine. But otherwise, I think you're just a freaking savage.
Well, I'm freeing myself from this, right? Because I have the same instinct as you. But I'm also prejudiced. The first Mac book was written in 1947, and I just prefer books from the 1950s rather than the 1940s. So I started out with book 2 from 1953, and get off my back, Eric.
So, I mean, I think you and I have we've had this conversation numerous times on here. I think you have almost agreed with me that by 1947, crime fiction had started to become pretty gritty and less cartoony.
Thanks to Mickey Spillane.
I'm going to call it the Spillane effect going forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
All right, so anyway, so Mac is a Chicago ex-cop turned private investigator who's hired to shadow a woman and 2 kids as they make their way from New York to Los Angeles on a train. Like, what could be easier? You ride the train with her, and you just keep an eye on the dame. The identity of the client is a mystery to Mac, and it's clear from the outset that this isn't going to be a simple domestic surveillance job. The target that he's supposed to keep an eye on, her name's Harriet. She gets off at every stop and uses the payphone, and local hoodlums are always kind of milling about every time she disembarks, even for a few minutes. Most relevantly, a prior operative who'd been following Harriet is gunned down in the street as Mac takes over this cross-country surveillance during a Chicago layover. Someone in the shadows here is playing for keeps. Much of the book's first half takes place on the train itself, and Mac's curiosity gets the better of him. He actually gets to know Harriet and her kids along the journey. And the thing is that separates Mac from the other hard-boiled private eyes in the mid-20th century is that he's actually a nice guy with compassion and empathy for others. And after reading hundreds of blood-on-the-knuckles mysteries with stoic heroes, having a protagonist narrator like Mac who cares about others is actually a breath of fresh air. He's no softy. He's just human. He can kick ass, and he takes a beating. He takes quite a beating in this one, but I won't spoil it. But he does it because he wants to help others. When the paperback's action shifts to Los Angeles, the big picture becomes clear to both Mac and the reader. Now, by 1953, Dewey had been writing genre fiction professionally for nearly a decade, and his storytelling chops are solid. Mac is a fantastic narrator. He's self-deprecating. He's funny. And the reader just wants to be his friend. The book, again, is called Every Bet's a Sure Thing, and it is filled with delightful surprises at every turn. Do not sleep on this one. Get yourself a copy. Read it ASAP. This is the highest recommendation I've made in ages for a private eye novel, at least. This one's just terrific.
Wow, that's setting the bar pretty high.
Yeah, it's great. I literally cannot wait to do the next read the next book in the series, but I got to mix some other things in there so we don't wear out the listeners with the Thomas Dewey review of the day.
When you say that he's funny, is he... Well, here's the thing that I've noticed with these private eye novels from the 40s and 50s and even early 60s, is they're always talking to you, the reader, in a sarcastic way.
There's a little, not so much that. I think he's not like Shel Scott, who's just filled with wisecracks,
right.
which I just find annoying. We'll talk about Shel Scott in a future episode, but he's more just witty and clever. I don't think it's smart alecky comments, but I do like, you're making a reference to something I enjoy quite a bit, the conversational style of narrator. So instead of who makes it, when you read the book, you feel like you're sitting next to an old guy in a bar who's telling you a story. I really do like that style.
Right, yeah, exactly. Sometimes it'll start on page 1 and it'll say, I'm so-and-so and I'm on this case now because of this chick hiring me, yada, yada, yada. He's sitting at a bar telling you the whole thing.
I like that. And I feel that it's just a really good way to tell a story, and it kind of takes away some of the literary pretensions from the writing. And
the problem that I've actually ran into is I've read so many of that style of storytelling that now if I get it in any other way, I just kind of get bored with it. And it seems like when they're telling me the story, I'm glued to it, and I've got to keep flipping pages.
I prefer first-person narrators almost always.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, we're coming up to the end of the episode, but I just want to give a shout-out. Last week, it was the 82nd birthday of Lawrence Block. And Lawrence Block, when you do the math, his new book came out on his 87th birthday. It's called Dead Girl Blues. I reviewed it on paperbackwarrior.com. I loved it. If you like Lawrence Block books or crime novels or really twisted stories, you're going to dig this one. It's not really crazy long. It's maybe 250 pages, or actually may even be coming in closer to 200. It's just a really good book, and I know that Lawrence Block has been a real supporter of Paperback Warrior. My review is in his Amazon listing or I blurbed it on Amazon, which is just an honor since I've been reading that guy since I was a teenager. But think about this. It's 2020 now. Lawrence Block has released this novel. His first book came out in 1958. That means that he has released novels in 8 different decades.
Yeah, it's insane.
Can you wrap your head around that?
Yeah, it's crazy.
8 different decades, and he's 82. So anyway, happy birthday to Lawrence Block, and I think that should probably wrap it up.
Sounds good. Yeah, appreciate that. All right, so you can check us out on paperbackwarrior.com. Check out all the reviews, all the features, all that fun stuff, and we'll see you next Monday for another exciting installment of this podcast.
Be cool, everybody.